Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. I'm Brother Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd at LMC. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. It's Wednesday night. It's our Wednesday night Bible study. I'm grateful that you hung out with me tonight, that you're here to get into Yah's Word. We got some neat stuff to go over. We're in the book of 2 Thessalonians. We're actually going to get into the book tonight. And, let's just jump right into it tonight. If you would, pray this prayer with me. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen. Listen, if you are new to our channel, if somebody sent this over to you, please, and if you like the message, if you like the study, if you learned something, if you're getting fed by it, please do us a favor, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to us, share this with someone else. If you're really fed, if you're really encouraged, you want to support us financially, you can do so. All sorts of different ways that you can do that through our app and our actual page, our webpage, all sorts of different ways. We thank you so much for all of your faithfulness. So let's just jump right into this. We're in the book of, and let me pop this up here so you guys can see. We're in the book of 2 Thessalonians, and the title for tonight is 2 Thessalonians. We're going to get into chapter 1. We're not going to get all the way through chapter 1, but we're going to get into chapter 1. And the subtitle for tonight is called Afflictions and Tribulations. Afflictions and Tribulations. Okay, so I don't want to do like a whole big review again. You know, we've done that a couple times. But I want to I want to share something with you. I want you guys to see this. And you can go back and check out all of the previous studies. We did a whole bunch of introductory stuff before we got into chapter 1 of 2 Thessalonians. And we spent weeks doing an introduction before we got into 1 Thessalonians. Because there's a lot of information you have to understand before you can actually read the book if you really want to know what the book's about. And so we did a whole bunch of review, a whole bunch of, going back and looking at things and trying to understand timelines. And a lot of this has to do with what we today called end times prophecy, but it's not really necessarily prophecy about us in our day, our end times. But it is extremely important prophecy. And we went through Matthew chapter 24, of course. The master tells us the whole story of Matthew 24. And when you read Matthew 24, because Messiah is just saying it as a statement, he's talking to them, answering their questions, and giving them all of the highlights of the things that are going to happen. Of course, you can go back, like I said, look at some of our older studies and get into all of this. But what it sounds like when you read Matthew 24, there's a couple different takeaways, or at least possible takeaways, or takeaways that things people have taken away from it. It sounds like what the master is saying when you read it is that there's going to be a time of birth pangs or birth pains that will culminate in the destruction of the temple, the abomination that leads to its desolation. And after the tribulation of those days, Messiah will return. He will split the sky. He will come with his messengers with the shout of an archangel, the trump of Yah. And so that first graph up there, if you guys can see that first graph, and let me do this so we can maybe, this is the graph that I'm talking about here. You guys can see I'm kind of putting it out in red there. That is certainly, as you read it, that's kind of, I get why you would come away with that, because that's sort of the order that he speaks. Now, today, the way that Matthew 24 and end times prophecy is looked at is the chart right underneath it. And the chart underneath it is extremely important as well. Here it is. Just like the other chart, it starts with the resurrection, the birth pangs, except after the resurrection. Today, most Bible prophecy teachers don't look at the birth pangs as something that has happened. They look at it as something that is going to happen somewhere off in the future. So the way it's looked at today is there's resurrection, and now there's been 2,000 years of history of Father getting this message out to the nations. At some point in the future, there will be another temple and another abomination of desolation and another tribulation. And then at the end of that, Messiah will return. Beloved, both of these things cannot be true. It's one or it's the other. And historically, it must be Jerusalem. And really the key, I guess, one of the main points to understanding this idea of another temple and another guy and all the rest of that kind of stuff is that you have to ignore the destruction of Jerusalem. You've got to look at it as though it is a non-event and that it has no significance and that it is about what's going to happen to us in the future. And, just from my own personal perspective, I know that's a bit high-minded for me. Little old us. It's about much, much more than just little old us. So those two charts that are up there, one showing us kind of what it sounds like when you read Matthew 24, not just Matthew 24, Luke 21. We saw this in the parable of the wedding feast. Again, we've gone over this multiple times. You guys should be versed in all of this and hopefully by this point clearly understand the order. But understanding kind of how different that is from the way most things are understood today. And listen, there's a lot of stuff going on today, and we're going to get into that too, as to what's actually going on and why things are actually going on the way they are. We'll touch on it a little bit today, and I think probably better next week we'll get more into it. But so with that, there's more pieces to the puzzle. See, I want to go back to this one more time. This is very simplistic. Right? If you look at that top graph, it's very simplistic, and certainly that's the way it sounds. And again, you got to remember, Yeshua's talking to the disciples. He's just, he's rattling off information to them. There's a lot of detail that's not in there that you have to understand. Its time frames. You can understand things that happen in between it, things that lead up to it. But it certainly is not, at least not by the standard that we're trying to raise here, it's not the bottom chart. But even if it was the top chart has a lot of details missing. And here are some more pieces to the puzzle. And guys, these the notes should be available online. You can download them, and this way you guys have a copy of them, or of course they're right up on your screen there. All right, so here we go. More pieces to the puzzle. There's more information than just the idea that there's birth pangs, then there's an abomination of desolation, and then Messiah comes. Because now we know that spanned almost 2,000 years from the birth pangs, from the resurrection. So here is a little bit more complete, and even this doesn't have all the information that fills in the gaps, but it's enough for us for today. Resurrection comes. Messiah is raised from the dead, ascends back to the Father. Birth pangs begin as the disciples begin to go out and to minister this word, first almost exclusively to Judah, to Jerusalem, the first 45 years before this message then begins to be told to the nations. And during that time, there is hardship and tribulation. This is about a 40-year period, 40-plus year period. And this is the time frame that we are reading in the book of Thessalonians. So we've got to understand where Thessalonians fits in this historical timeline to understand what things are being said to them. So that's where they are. They're in that part of the birth pangs. They're watching famine, and they're watching earthquakes, and they're watching pestilence, and they're watching wars. These things are going on all around them, all in throughout the Roman Empire, and certainly with regards to Jerusalem. So they're watching this. The next major event would then be the temple. Jerusalem, the temple being destroyed, Jerusalem being sacked and being trampled by the nations, which then begins, and the master describes this as great tribulation. And so does Revelation. When we see in Revelation 7, we get the 144,000, the Netzarim who come out there to preach the gospel. And then what comes after them? Every tribe, nation, and tongue standing there in white robes with palms in their hands, serving the master. Well, that is really the order of things. The disciples go out, they go through horrible tribulation, the temple gets destroyed, and then now they are scattered all over the world. This message really begins to go to all of the nations. Yes, it went to the nations before 70 AD, but it really got a kickstart after 70 AD when everybody left Jerusalem and traveled all over the world. And it's been, and I got down there, 1,952 years, approximately, give or take, since the destruction of the temple. So for 1,952 years, there's been a diaspora. There's been a scattering. This message has gone out to the nations. At some point in the future, Messiah will return. When? I don't know. Nobody really knows. He's going to come when he comes. We've got some ideas. There's some neat theories we can come up with. But the bottom line is he's going to come when he comes. And then the kingdom will be established. And then the final judgment going into what we call the 8th day. This is a much more detailed outline of the events we've talked about multiple times. But the absolute most important event in this timeline, yes, of course, is the death and resurrection of Messiah. Certainly, without it, there is no deliverance. But the most pivotal historical event that most of the religious world today just skirts right over, doesn't even pay it any mind, is the destruction of the temple. It is an integral part to the entire story, and it has been prophesied about again and again and again and again so many times before Yeshua comes. Yeshua is not the first one who says that the temple is going to be destroyed, that Jerusalem is going to be ransacked, that the people are going to be scattered, and we'll check out some of those scriptures today. So this is the outline, or the timeline, I guess is a better way of saying it. This is the timeline I want us all to be aware of as we go forward from here. But again, the most pivotal event is the temple, is Jerusalem. Because this is the dividing point between what was and the birthing point for something new. A new nation is birthed after this, that now goes out into all of the world and grafts the rest of the world into that nation. The unfaithful son is removed. The faithful son is now given the nation and is expected to bear fruit. Okay, so a little bit of review. Again, you guys can go back and check out some of the notes from some of the previous messages that we've done. If you want much more detail on that, you can get that. It's really important that we know this stuff, though. Okay, so here we go. We're in Thessalonians. So how are the Thessalonians thinking about this timeline? Because I'm going to go back one more time. I know I'm jumping back and forth the screens here. There is no way that the Thessalonians are thinking about that timeline that you see up on your screen. It's impossible. I mean, you and I try to think about, let's say Yah tarries for another 2,000 years. Do we have any concept of what life might be like 2,000 years ahead of us? Of course we don't. We don't think like that. Most of us don't think past the day or the week, or the month or the year that we're in. Nonetheless, 2,000 years of history. So there is absolutely no way that the people of Thessalonica, which remember is a mixture of Jews and Gentiles, people of the nations, they're no longer Gentiles, they're no longer Jews, they're now part of the body of Messiah. But that aside, there is no way that they understood the timeline that you and I understand. And of course, you've all heard me use this phrase before. Hindsight is 20/20, and you hear that a lot. That just means that when you're past the events, it's a lot easier to look back and say, oh yeah, this is what happened and that's what happened. And it is easier for us to do it. So what were they thinking? Because we really get a window into their thinking in 2 Thessalonians. In fact, it tells us emphatically what they were thinking. And they got some things wrong. Or they got the order of things wrong. Or really, I guess the better way to say it is there were people feeding them falsehoods. And so there was a real issue and a problem that we'll get into when we get to 2 Thessalonians. So what were the Thessalonians thinking? Well, here's another chart. Again, I want to keep it simplified, but here's the basic idea that we're going to find is going to unfold in the book of 2 Thessalonians. Yes, of course, number one, there it is. Messiah comes, right? That's number one. We got that. That to them was even history. Maybe 40 years ago, but still 50 years ago. I think some of the dating for the book of Thessalonians is like 50 to 52 AD, which would then place it 18, 20 years prior to the destruction of the temple. So even to them, it's still a future event, but you're going to see how important this event is, and that this was discussed openly, both in the congregations in Thessalonica and Ephesus and all the other congregations and by all the disciples. And yet when we read it, we kind of skirt right over it, not realizing that was the topic. That was huge. Yes, Messiah came, he died, he rose. That's big. You can't get away from that. But the idea that Jerusalem will be destroyed was just, that was mind-boggling to them. That was inconceivable to them. And yet it was going to happen. So they understood the idea of Messiah. They understood the idea of resurrection. They understood the idea that they can now come to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But here's where they are. And this, of course, is number 2. They, from their perspective, and we're going to see this get played out in the actual language, they're going through hardships. They're going through tribulation. They're going through afflictions. The same afflictions Messiah said his disciples would go through, both to those that were standing there as he's speaking to them at the foot of the temple, telling them about not one stone upon another, and all the believers that would come after them. They were in the midst of great tribulation. I'm going to use the word great tribulation because that has other connotations to it, but they were in the middle of tribulation. They were in the middle of birth pangs. These things were happening to them, and stuff got really, really difficult. So in the language of Messiah, in the language of Matthew, in the language of Luke, what's the next event after suffering? It's this. Messiah returns. And so were they of the first century looking for the return of Messiah? The Thessalonians were, no doubt. And you're going to see that Saul's going to try to really define this for them and bring them back in their thinking to the correct pattern or the correct outline. But this concept, this chart, is you're going to see this is going to get played out in the thinking of the Thessalonians. They're going through hardship. The next thing they're waiting for is the coming of Messiah. And there's even going to come a point you're going to see by the time we get to chapter 2, they're going to think they missed it. There's going to be people who are going to tell them, you missed it. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's take this just one step at a time. Okay, so here we go. Let's jump into the narrative for tonight. I want to try to get through as much of the scripture as we can. And then we'll go back. We'll do some commentary. So here's 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 1. And it says, Shaul and Silas and Timothy, to the assembly of the Thessalonians in Elohim our Father and the Master Yeshua Messiah. Favor to you and peace from Elohim our Father and the Master Yeshua Messiah. We ought to give thanks to Elohim always for you, brothers, as it is proper, because your belief, your faith, grows exceedingly. So these people were doing good as far as their faith and understanding. Don't forget, they're a mixed bag there. There's Jews, and there are also Gentiles or former Gentiles, probably a lot of them proselytes, but when we go back to Acts 17, there were a lot that just came, that just listened and heard. So, they're teaching each other. Silas was there, Timothy was there, they're learning, and they're evidently growing in faith. It says, as is proper, because your belief grows exceedingly, and the love of every one of you has for each other is increasing, so that we ourselves boast of you among the assemblies of Elohim for your, so he's telling them, listen, we're telling the congregation at Jerusalem, we're telling the congregation at Ephesus, we're telling the people at Thyatira, we're telling the people at Sardis, we're telling all of these other congregations as we get to see them, we're telling them about you guys. Why? And here it is. I put it in blue so that you guys can notice this. Remember, yellow is the PDP version. All other colors are just an emphasis of the scripture. So here it is. Of you among the assemblies of Elohim for your endurance and belief in all your persecutions and afflictions which you are bearing. Now that gives us a real important window into what's going on in this congregation. It's not just this congregation. This is going to wind up happening to all congregations, but this is the book of Thessalonians. So we're dealing with these people. They were going through some very, very difficult times. And Messiah said they would, said the disciples would, and everyone who believes in his name would. Well, here it is, Matthew chapter 24 and verse 9. They shall deliver you up to affliction, tribulation, and even kill you. And you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. These are the birth pangs. So there's no doubt that Saul's talked to them about this stuff already. There's no doubt that what they're going through is real and it's harsh and it's raw. And yet, despite going through all of that, there is this wonderful faith that is coming out of them, this love for one another. So much so that Saul is talking about it to other congregations. Let's go on and read just a little bit. Now, when it says, I want to backtrack just for a second. When he says, I'm sorry, I went there we go, went the wrong way. When he says, you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake, because normally, you hear that when you read that in Matthew 24, you think Yeshua is talking about, all the nations, all the way up to our time, that are going to hate the disciples. And that's been true. That's been true throughout history. The Netzarim, the disciples, have been hated. They've been persecuted. They've been, killed, destroyed. All of that continued to go on because that is the great tribulation that occurs after the destruction of the temple. But these are the birth pangs. But when we say nations, that this nations hating the master starts with Israel, starts with the leadership of Israel, and then, of course, evolves as time goes on into the nations, into Rome, and then everything that Rome is after that. There is this suffering that's going on. Didn't start with the Thessalonians. It started, just weeks, months, not even months, weeks after the ascension. Things start to go south as the leadership of Israel starts to really put pressure on the Netzarim. Here is the story, and so just to kind of give a little bit of the background of tribulation, of what these people in Thessalonia are actually enduring. Let's look at some of the other accounts that are recorded in Scripture of, what went on after the resurrection. There is, in the book of Acts, chapter 4, the story of the healing of the lame man who's outside of the temple. He gets healed, money we don't have, but what we do have in the name of Yeshua Messiah, get up and walk. Amazing miracle, right? Incredible. And this miracle ticks off the leadership so much that they take the apostles and they bring them before the Sanhedrin to grill them. Well, they do. They grill them. And they command the disciples, after going through this whole thing, they tell them, don't speak in the name of Yeshua anymore. And of course, Gamaliel comes up and he says, listen, if these people, there's been so many people, so many other messiahs that have come up. There's always a new messiah, always a new group of people following them. If these people are just like those, and this is just going to fall apart, just like every other messiah that's ever come. But if this thing is of Yah, the guy was healed outside of the temple. But if this thing is of Yah, you don't want to be found fighting God. Well, unfortunately, the Sanhedrin really didn't listen to Gamaliel. Yes, in chapter 4, it kind of sounds like they listened to him, but by chapter 5 and 6, they totally ignored Gamaliel's instruction. So after all this, they flog him a little bit, beat him up a little bit, and they kick him out from the Sanhedrin. They kick him loose. We really got nothing we can hold him on. Well, they go back to the congregation, to the other disciples, and they're rejoicing, that they got out of that, and God gave them opportunity to give testimony despite all the heartache. And here's verse 24. Look at how they describe this, and look at the verses that they choose to use to describe this, because they pull up verses from the Psalms. And here is chapter 4, verse 24. It says, and having heard that, they lifted up their voice to Elohim with one mind and said, Yah, you are Elohim, who made the heaven and the earth and sea and all that is in them, who by the mouth of your servant David have said, and now they're quoting Psalm, this is Psalm 2, and look at what they quote about the nations, because we think nations means all of us now. It starts with Israel. Why did the nations rage and the people plot in vain? The kings of the earth stood up, and the rulers were gathered together against Yah and against his Messiah. This is what the disciples are quoting. They're quoting David saying, what we just went through is the fulfillment of this verse. Not just the nations as you and I know it today. This started all the way back then. Now look at verse 27. I put it in a little bit different color, so hopefully it pops out for you. It says, for truly in this city, in Jerusalem, there were gathered together against your set-apart servant Yeshua, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the nations. Because Rome, because we're talking about Rome is the last leg of that man we talked about yesterday, from Babylon all the way to Rome. That's the man, that's the nations. It's connected to all of those nations, the beasts that come out of the sea. So they're saying, with the nations and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your purpose decided before to be done. They're equating Psalm 2, why did the nations rage, as starting with Israel, but not just Israel, Herod, the king of a different people. He's not Jewish, a different nation. The Romans, representative of all the nations, all the different peoples of that day. They were all there plotting a vain thing against Yah. And this is how the disciples saw it. This is the verse that they use, that they pull out, and has now become part of our scripture. This is how they identified it. So when Messiah says, let's take a look at it one more time, chapter 24, verse 9, then they shall deliver you up to affliction and kill you, and you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Well, who does that start with? Starts with Israel. And yes, will become Rome, and then after Rome, Catholic Rome, and so forth and so on, all the way down to where we are today. But I want you to see that this starts, the disciples absolutely identified the Psalm of David with the events that were going on right there in their time. And now, Yah, look on their threats and give your servants all boldness to speak your word. They were going through tribulation and they were happy about it. They were excited. They're like, wow, this is what the master said was going to happen. Now listen, nobody wants to go through tribulation and hardship. It stinks when you're going through it. But they were rejoicing that they went through it. They survived it, and they were able to give testimony to Yah. So if this is what's going on in Jerusalem, just, months after Messiah's resurrection, do you think it gets better as time goes on, or is it going to get more difficult as time goes on? And of course, the answer to that is it gets more difficult. Here's the story of Stephen. So that's chapter 4. So by chapter 6, the Sanhedrin just threw right out of the window all the wonderful advice that Gamaliel gave them. Listen, don't persecute these guys. If it's of Yah, you don't want to be found fighting God. They don't care. The Annas and his family, and they didn't care. The Sanhedrin, they didn't care. And so now we get into chapter 6, which is the story of Stephen. More affliction, more tribulation. Why? For the name of Yeshua. But there's something that goes on in this passage that I want you to focus in on, because even though it seems to almost just sort of get a backhanded message, you've got to realize this was a powerful statement, so much so that it's being used against Stephen. So here we go. Here's Acts chapter 6 and verse 13, more afflictions, more tribulation. Verse 13 says, so here's Stephen. He's giving testimony. It says, and they set up false witnesses against Stephen. So they hired guys. He gets dragged before the Sanhedrin, before Annas. He's standing, and Caiaphas, he's before them. So this is a court. This is an actual court that he's standing in front of. But they set up false witnesses who said, this man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against this set-apart place and the Torah. Now, hold on a second. Now, this is a false witness, but in every false witness, there's a little bit of truth in there, because don't you think the disciples, after the resurrection, after the 40 days of being with Messiah, after the last week of being with him, and Messiah over and over and over again telling us about the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, the blasphemy of the priest and the scribes and the Sadducees. Don't you think the disciples continued that story? They continued telling people. Well, here we get a little window, a little glimpse to say, yes, they absolutely did. And these guys are using it against them. So we have heard them use words against the set-apart place and the Torah, for we have heard him say that this Yeshua of Nazareth shall overthrow this place. Now, of course, they're embellishing here, right? They're adding, they're lying, right? They're adding to the truth. But what's the truth here? Messiah did emphatically tell them, the vineyard owners, kill them, destroy their city, give it to someone else. The wedding feast, destroy their city, get my other servants and go out to the highways and byways. To the fig tree, be destroyed, cast into the sea. Not one stone left upon another. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, all the blood of all the prophets spilt will fall on this generation. So they're using those words against him now. So I extrapolate here, think through this for a second. What was a very important, very prominent aspect of the preaching of this gospel right here in the first century? Yes, Messiah came, Messiah died, Messiah rose. Of course that is. But what else is very, very prevalent is the temple's coming down. Because that's what Yeshua said was going to happen. And here you get this window here that they're using this against him because this is what Messiah said, and this has to be what the disciples are also talking about. And you can imagine how this buzz just like went through the temple. You know, the one who died and rose again, the giving of the Spirit on Shavuot. He said the temples, he's going to destroy it's like the game of telephone. You know, Yah didn't say that Yeshua was going to come and destroy it, though I guess in one sense really he did, or he is going to do that. There's going to be the wrath of the Lamb that does it. They're embellishing here. It's almost like the telephone game, and they're making it, out to seem more egregious, more blasphemous. But really what it was blasphemous to, or in opposition to, was the rules and regulations of the Pharisees. So, one more time, verse 14, for we have heard him saying that this Yeshua of Nazareth shall overthrow this place, the temple, and Jerusalem, not one stone left upon another, and change the institutes which Moses delivered unto us. Well, problem is they're not actually doing the things that Moses delivered unto them. So in one sense, there's truth in what they're saying, because he's telling them, don't do what the Pharisees do. Do what Moses said when they sit in Moses' seat and they read Moses. So there's grains of truth in these false witnesses, but these grains of truth should really open up our eyes to the importance of the story of the destruction of Jerusalem. It is pivotal to what's coming. So these people are all buzzed about it. They're listening to it. And of course, it winds up in Acts chapter 7 as Stephen gives his testimony. Verse 51, to the Sanhedrin in a court hearing, he says, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. You always resist the set-apart spirit as your fathers did. He's not telling us anything different. In these words of Stephen, he's not saying anything different than Yeshua didn't say in Matthew 23 with all the woes. You serpents, you brood of vipers. And they wanted to kill Messiah for doing it. What do you think they're going to do to these disciples who are now continuing that same message of the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the religious order as it is? What do you think they're going to do? They're going to put these people through trial and tribulation. Starting with Israel and all the nations, they will be hated for Messiah's namesake. And we're looking at it right here as it's happening in Acts chapter 7, 6 and 7. So he says, you always resist the set-apart spirit, as your fathers did, you also do. Verse 52, which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who before announced the coming of the righteous one, of whom you have now become betrayers and murderers. Man, Stephen just bam, just laid it right out in front of them. He is not pulling any punches here. Who received the Torah as it was ordained by messengers, but did not watch over it. So he's putting this thing back in order. Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, destruction is coming. You did what has always been done. You killed the righteous one. You killed the prophets. You killed the righteous one. And you don't keep Torah. You haven't guarded Torah. That's the issue. So, of course, by verse 57, it says, "And crying out with a loud voice, they stopped their ears." We're talking about in a court setting. This is a court setting. And you've got all the Pharisees just, taking their fingers and they put it in their ears. They stopped their ears and rushed upon him with one mind and threw him. So basically the mob took over. Well, it's a court hearing. So, the bailiffs and they just grab them, get him out of here. He's guilty. What more need do we have? What other testimony? From his own mouth, he's telling us this temple's coming down. From his own mouth, he's telling us these things. So what's going to come? What's going to come Stephen's way? Afflictions and tribulation. The same thing Yeshua said was coming. They stopped their ears. They rushed upon him with one mind, and they threw him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Shaul. Thus enters Saul or Shaul into this picture. So tribulation of believers, affliction already started. It's already there. And it has already gotten to the point of death. Persecution, yes. Now it's thrown in prison, beating them up a little bit, flogging them, get a telephone book, smack them around a little bit. But now it's gotten to death. Now it's gotten to stoning. And of course, Saul jumps right on in there and he becomes the hand of death for so many people. Acts chapter 8, verse 1 says, "And Shaul was giving approval to his death. And on that day there was great persecution, great tribulation against the assembly which was in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the countries of Yehuda and Samaria, Judah and Samaria, except the emissaries." Seems like the apostles, they were brave enough to stay there. "And dedicated men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Shaul was ravaging the assembly, entering every house and dragging off men and women, putting them in prison." And ultimately, these people getting put in prison, they're going to die. Many of them are going to die. They're going to be found guilty, just like Stephen, and they're going to wind up giving testimony, just like Stephen. Testimony of what? Yes, Yeshua is Messiah. Yes, he is the Son of God. Yes, he rose from the dead. And yes, he's going to destroy Jerusalem. And yes, he's going to bring down all the traditions and religion that we've got here because you do not guard the Torah. They're going to say the same things that Yeshua said. And the same thing is going to happen to them. Trial, tribulation, affliction. Acts chapter 13 and verse 49. It says, "And the word of Yah was being spread throughout the entire country. But the Yehudim stirred up the worshiping noblewomen and chief men of the city and raised up persecutions against Saul," who eventually, Saul, obviously you know the story, he comes to be part of this people of the way. And so now Saul is having the stuff he did now thrown back on him by other Jews, Saul and Barnabas, and threw them out of their borders. I'm showing you these things so you get a picture in your mind that when Yeshua says affliction, tribulation, before the destruction of the temple, these are the birth pangs leading up to it. They already started. And they started in Jerusalem, but they were not limited to Jerusalem. And please don't think that Saul was the only guy commissioned by the Sanhedrin to go out and to round up people. I'm sure they hired lots of different people to do it. Saul just happened to be really good at it. And of course, the story surrounds him because the master picks him to be his emissary, to be his voice. So trial and hardship. People are dying. People are losing their businesses. They're losing their homes. They're losing their families. They're being kicked out of synagogues. They're being ostracized. They're being put in prison. They're being flogged. They're being beaten. They're being starved. And many of them are dying for the testimony that Stephen gave, that Yeshua gave. And of course, now that Saul is giving, and he's got the same problems, the same issues. But it doesn't end there. It's not just the Jews that do this. This persecution, because we were told, the Psalm 2, why do the nations rage? Jerusalem, Herod, Pontius Pilate, Rome. But it's going on. It's going even beyond them now as this message is going out. So if you are a people of the nations, a Gentile, and this message, you are called and you are chosen and you come to it, you also are going to face grave persecution, both from the Jews, because they don't want you in there in the synagogue. Most of them, the ones who are in the leadership, they don't want you in there. And now you're going to get it from your own people as well. Here's the story in Ephesus, Acts chapter 19. So you can see the Gentiles were just as nutty, just as crazy, just as mean, just as horrible as the leadership, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, and all the rest of them were. Well, here it is. It says, and about that time, there came to be a great commotion about the way. Obviously, the name of this quote unquote sect, the people of the way, the Netzarim. And not only there's I think the guy's name is Demetrius that has an accusation because Paul is coming in there, Gentiles are coming to him, and he's fearing that this idol trade that they've got going on, they're making the Diana idols, is at stake here. It comes down to money, I guess. So it says, not only is this trade of ours, idol making, in danger of coming to rejection? Because if you start listening to these Jews who came out of Jerusalem, you're being just like them. You may have been my part of my temple of Diana, but now you're hanging out with Jews, and that makes you a Jew, and that could cause problems, and it did. But in danger of coming to rejection, but also that the temple of the great female mighty one, Artemis or Diana, same thing, whom all Asia and the world worship, shall be regarded as worthless and her greatness diminished. So they're afraid that this new message that people are flocking to is going to put their livelihood and their concept of their gods, they're going to be diminished. So verse 28 says, and having heard this, they were filled with rage and cried out, saying, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Verse 33, I'm skipping some verses just for time's sake. I encourage you to go ahead and read this in its detail. But verse 33 says, and some of the crowd instructed Alexander, the Yehudim, putting him forward. So Alexander's a Jew, and he's trying to calm these people down. He lives in the city. He's there. He's part of all of this. And Alexander motioned with his hand and wished to make his difference to the people. And look at their response. But having recognized that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Guys, this is a riot. This is a riot that if it's not put down, eventually it does get put down, but that's here. There's other times there's riots and it doesn't get put down and people get beat and stoned and flogged and killed. And so it's not just the Jews that were doing this. It's not just the Jews that refused to believe in Messiah that were causing persecution. It was the Gentiles to their own people, in their own towns, against this message of the Jews, to them, the message of the Jews, the message of the Netzarim, that are disrupting their religion. And as they're sitting there, as I read this, and he says, and when you read on, it says for 2 hours, they're just, great is Artemis, great is Artemis. In my mind's eye or in my mind's ear, you know what I hear? Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. Another God, our God is great. That's kind of what they're doing here. They fear that this message is going to mess with their religion. And it will. There's no doubt it won't. But they're not going to react to it well. So it is exactly what Psalm 2 said. The nations are raging. So people who are coming to faith, both that of the Yehudim and that of the foreigner and the stranger, all of their lives are now in danger. All of them are under persecution. All of them are under affliction. Okay, Acts chapter 8. and verse 35. It says, who shall, and this is why. So I'm using Romans. It says Acts. It's actually Romans. I'm looking at this. I'm saying, wait, that's not Acts. It's the book of Romans, chapter 8 and verse 35. This is why Saul says this, so that we can kind of wrap our minds around how difficult things were for these first century believers. Who shall separate us from the love of Messiah? Shall pressure or distress, persecution, tribulation, or scarcity of food, or nakedness, or danger, or sword? As it has been written, for your sake we are killed all day long. We are reckoned as sheep for the slaughter. But in all this, we are more than overcomers through him who loved us. Even if your life gets taken, even if your house gets broken into, even if you lose your job, even if your family kicks you out, even if you get excommunicated, even if they push you out of the synagogue, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Saul's telling, even if all of that goes on, he's not telling these people health, wealth, prosperity, all the stuff that we hear today. This is a totally different message than we hear today. He's telling them things are hard, and this is what Yeshua said was going to happen. Excuse me. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor messengers, nor principalities, nor powers, neither the present nor the future, nor the height, nor the depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of Elohim, which is in Messiah Yeshua, our master. So Saul kind of gives us a synopsis statement here in the book of Romans, chapter 8. But I want you to apply this in your thinking to the Thessalonians, because this is what the Thessalonians were going through in their own way, in their own town. And despite that, they were growing in faith. Despite that, their testimony was being spoken about in all other congregations. So here's 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 4 again. Let's get back to the narrative. That we ourselves boast of you among the assemblies of Elohim in you, for your endurance and belief, faith, in all your persecutions. And, again, just right up there at Romans 8, there's a list of persecutions, including death. This is what the Thessalonians were going through. In all your persecutions and afflictions, which you are bearing. So, guys, let's get this straight. These people are having a really, really hard time, and yet they're not giving up. They got it. They understand what this is about, both those who were Jewish and those who were former Gentiles. They've got it, but they are really paying the price for their belief. And look at verse 5. I love this. So you're going through in your belief and all your persecutions and your afflictions, which you are bearing. And I put it in blue there so that you could see it. All of those things are clear evidence of the righteous judgment of Elohim. Now, just think of how twisted things have become today, because all we hear is wealth, health, prosperity, finance, material. God's going to give you. God's going to give you. God loves you. He's going to bless you. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. He's going to do that. When the actual story is you will suffer persecution. You will suffer affliction. And when you do, when you are afflicted, if you are bearing the testimony, if you are the called, if you are truly understanding that persecution, that tribulation is clear evidence of the righteous judgment of Elohim. Again, totally opposite message that we hear today. It's like we just skip right over this and nobody pays attention to this, because who doesn't want to hear, God loves you and he's going to give you everything you need. He's going to pay your mortgage and give you a car and, a new job. And yeah, I mean, every good and perfect gift, it does come from Yah, but the nations are raging and we're still in the midst of tribulation, lots of hardship and trouble for the last 2,000 years. Guys, look at what's going on all around us, You get a Supreme Court that says, listen, as a federal institution, We're not supposed to kill babies. Let's kick it back down to the States. And people are flipping out because we've lost the right to kill babies. Boy, we are in trouble. But I'll deal more with that next week. I don't want to get on a soapbox with that. But that was just on my mind. So anyway, so that's clear evidence of the righteous judgment of Elohim in order for you to be counted worthy of the reign of Elohim, or the kingdom of Elohim, for which you also suffer. So, so very different kind of thinking than is most commonly the religious thinking of today. And here's 1 Thessalonians 4:13. This is why in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4:13, we went over this before, you guys can go back and check out 1 Thessalonians on this, but this is why Saul says these words in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. Now, brothers, we do not wish you to be ignorant concerning those who have fallen asleep, those who have died, those who have been killed, those who have lost their lives for the testimony of Yah. He's talking about brethren. People have been kicked out of their home. That's who he's talking about. So they've got a question, what about them? Well, he's answering it. He's telling them, I want you to understand, even though they've died, even though they've given the ultimate sacrifice here, that is part of the righteous judgment. Ignorant concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you be sad as others who have no expectation or no hope. For if we believe that Yeshua died and rose again, so Elohim shall bring with him those who sleep in the Master. And you can go on and you can read the rest of the verses. I don't want to, backtrack on that. But that's one of the reasons why 1 Thessalonians 4 is put there in the book of 1 Thessalonians, because this is what they were enduring. This is the hardships. Guys, talking about as terrible as it is today, that's a very, very different time in history. Life was cheap and you could be, gone in a second. So here is just another verse. This is 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12. You guys should know this one. This is a really often quoted one, but it's true. It's as true today as it was then. And indeed, this is Saul talking to Timothy. And indeed, all those people who really get it, who are like the Thessalonians, who really get it, wishing to live reverently in Messiah Yeshua, shall be persecuted. Whether it's in your home, whether it's with your family, whether it's at your job, and my goodness, the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on. But we're trying to deal with it as the Thessalonians are experiencing it. So this is the beginning thoughts that Saul is expressing to these people in Thessalonia. All right, so let's get back to the narrative. So they're suffering. So if you're a shepherd half worth your salt, what are you going to do in speaking to people who are going through really, really difficult times, trials and tribulations? Well, you're going to try to encourage them. You're going to try to encourage them with truth, but you're going to try to encourage them. And that's exactly what the shepherd Shaul does here. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 6, he says, since Elohim shall rightly repay with affliction those who afflict you, and give you who are afflicted rest with us. And I put it in blue so you get the perspective of what he's saying, because you're going to see by chapter 2, they kind of got the outline, again, a little wonky here. They're expecting, Messiah to come at any moment. But he says, the encouragement is, hey, those who are persecuting you, God's going to deal with them. When the Master Yeshua is revealed from heaven with his mighty messengers. And I put it in a little bit different color because it's talking about the same thing, but where does this come from? In flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who do not know Elohim, and on those who do not obey the good news of our Master Yeshua Messiah, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Master and from the glory of his strength, when he comes to be glorified in his set-apart ones, to be admired among all those who believe in that day, because our witness to you was believed. You could read that, and as a Thessalonian, you might be saying, oh, so the people who persecuted me, Yah's going to go ahead and deal with them, and we can, we think of it today in our world like, instant karma. Ever see those videos where somebody does something real stupid, cuts off somebody on the road, and, 30 seconds up, somebody bangs into them, to their car. You're like, oh, instant karma. We would say what goes around comes around in our culture today. Or the biblical thing is you reap what you sow, right? Or you sow what you reap. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. No, you reap what you sow. I said it right the first time. But that's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about a quote unquote instant karma. He's saying what you're going through. I want you to be encouraged. Those who are persecuting you, Yah's going to deal with them. But maybe not today. And maybe not tomorrow. And maybe not in your lifetime is really what he's saying. Because he says the ultimate payment is when the master is revealed from heaven with his heavenly messengers. So in one sense, they could be thinking, all right, well, he's going to come and we're going to set all of this straight. Everything's going to be ironed out when he comes. Well, it will, except, here we are now 2,000 years later. So there's something about the timeline we've got to get correct. Now, I want to put your emphasis there on that blue-green coloring that I've got there. In flaming fire, to take vengeance on those who do not know Elohim. Now Yeshua sort of talks about this, but he doesn't talk about this in this type of language. We get this in Revelation. We'll get there eventually. But when the master talks about this, he doesn't use that same wording. Here's Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. And again, I get why maybe they thought this. It says, and immediately after the distress of those days, and the days he's talking about are the days of the destruction of the temple. So we read this today. Like today, people are reading this, say, well, immediately after the tribulation of those days. Well, he's talking about a 7-year tribulation in the future. No, he's not. He is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Immediately after the destruction of Jerusalem, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from heaven. Guys, he's not talking about the moon, nor is he talking about the stars or the sun. These are all analogous words to the witness or the testimony shall be diminished of the people of Israel. Only a remnant will be left. That's what those words mean. So he's telling us what's going to happen right after the destruction of Jerusalem. So many are going to die. The witness, the testimony, the whatever light there could be from them, it's diminished. In fact, it's not fully diminished. It tells us when you read Revelation, a third and a third and a third, but it's diminished. That's immediately following the days of that tribulation, or the days that the Thessalonians are in right now, leading up to the temple destruction. Immediately following those days, the sun will be darkened. But verse 30, we now know verse 30, there's 2,000 or 1,954 years, if I remember the number correctly from my chart before, from immediately after the days of that tribulation to where we are today. Verse 30, and then, after that, and then the sign of the Son of Adam shall appear in the heaven, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and much glory. Now Paul's talking about fire and judgment, and Yeshua is talking about clouds. They're not exclusive of one another. They are inclusive of each other, but this is how Messiah is describing it. So where does Saul get that information from? How does Saul come up with this idea that all the stuff that happens to you, all the trial and tribulation, those that persecute you, they're going to get theirs when Messiah comes in flaming judgment? Where does that come from? Well, let's finish reading a little bit. Verse 31 says, and he shall send his messengers with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his chosen ones from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. So read it carefully. You realize he's not talking about one event and then automatically the next one happens, but he is telling us after the days of that tribulation that they are all going through right now, the sun will be darkened, the moon will lose its light, the stars shall fall from the heavens, all stuff that we see in book of Revelation. And then, sometime after. Again, for us, 1,954 years later, we're still waiting for Messiah to come. And it may be it's obviously a whole lot closer now than it was back then, but that's another message for another day. So where does he, where is Saul getting this from? Where does he get this idea of, because that's not really, I mean, Yeshua says, yes, all the tribes of the earth shall mourn. All right, so something's going to happen that's going to freak everybody out. But where does he get all of this, fiery deal with the nations and all that trouble you? Well, where do you get everything else? It's prophecy. It's in the Torah. It's in the prophets. Here's Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 25, which means when Saul was speaking to these people at Thessalonica, he shared this stuff with them. He didn't just come up with this off the top of his head. He's remembering or recalling scripture to try to get them to understand. Here is Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 25. Listen to this, guys. Pour out your wrath on the nations who do not know you, and on the tribes who do not call on your name. For they have eaten up Jacob, devoured him, and consumed him, and laid waste his home. So it's kind of a conundrum here because, it's because of the sin of Israel that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. But the nations who are going to do it are going to do it so horrifically and just refuse the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Judgment's going to fall on them too. And then they're going to persecute the true people of God, the renewed house of Israel. And there's a prophecy in Jeremiah saying, yeah, he's going to come and he is going to pour out wrath on the nations who do not know him and on those who do not call on your name. Those are almost verbatim the words that Saul used in 2 Thessalonians. Here's Psalm 79. This is a phenomenal psalm. We're going to go all through the whole psalm because it really is that cool of a psalm. So listen to this. Here's Psalm 79, and we're starting at verse 1. It's not 11. That's a typo. Verse 1. It says, O Elohim, the nations have come into your inheritance. Well, what's his inheritance? The house of Israel is. So the nations have invaded into the house of Israel. They have defiled your set-apart temple, the Hekel. They turned Jerusalem into ruins. Now let's put this in historical perspective here. This is a prophecy, but to you and I, this is history. When did Psalm 79 occur? 70 AD. From 67 to 70 AD, that 3-year period or 3.5-year period, Rome is who he's talking about or who he is prophesying about. This is how Saul can say the things he's saying to them in 2 Thessalonians. They turned Jerusalem into ruins. They have given the dead bodies of your servants as food for the birds of the heavens. This is why Yeshua says his coming in wrath, in judgment, is like lightning from the east to the west. And wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will be. He's talking about the horrific, fast-moving Roman army that's going to come in and destroy and murder almost 1 million people in that siege of Jerusalem. And they're just going to let the bodies rot out there and allow the birds of the air, the vultures, to come and use these bodies as food. Where do you think Yeshua is? What he's quoting? Yeshua is quoting Psalm 79 in Matthew 24. It says, verse 2 one more time, they have given the dead bodies of your servants as food for the birds of the heavens, the flesh of your lovingly committed ones to the wild beast of the earth. They have poured out their blood like water. This comes right out of Revelation chapter 14, which is the description of the destruction of Jerusalem. So much blood. The analogy in Revelation 14 is blood flowing up to the bridle of a horse. Now that's an analogy, right? That's a mental picture telling us there's going to be a lot of death. I mean, how much blood can come out of 1 million people? A lot of blood. And that's what Jerusalem looked like during, and not just the Jews, it was the Romans too are dying there. They're also being killed. That's what this is saying. So this helps us understand what Revelation is actually speaking about. Their blood like water all around Jerusalem. with no one to bury them. We have become a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a mockery to those who are around us for the last 2,000 years. And don't forget, Yeshua told his disciples, when you see this, when you see Rome starting to gather around, get out so that you don't face the judgment that's coming upon them. Because if you stayed in Jerusalem after listening to the Master's words and you saw all of this stuff happening, you didn't get out, you were going to suffer in Jerusalem just like everyone else. Thankfully, lots of Netzarim got out. They saw us. Guys, think about it, with the whole Ukraine story, right? The whole Ukraine thing. We saw for weeks the whole Russian army, hundreds of 150, 170,000 soldiers, tanks and planes and everything else surrounding all of Ukraine. And yet in Ukraine, they kept telling their people, don't worry about it. It's just an exercise. They're not going to come. They're not going to attack. Don't worry about it. And people stayed. My goodness, if you saw that happening, get out. Get out as fast as you can. Well, I used that analogy to kind of give you the glimpse of what was going on in Jerusalem. They saw it, and the leaders in Jerusalem were saying, don't worry about it. We got the temple. It's not going to happen. Stay. And I'm sure there were people that stayed. Messiah tells the disciples, pray that you be found worthy to escape the coming judgment of Jerusalem. But you got to listen to the Master's words. So here's where it comes out of here in Psalm chapter 79, verse 4. We become a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a mockery to those around us. For 2,000 years they have. The whole Jewish nation has become a mockery to the world. How long, O Yah, would you be enraged forever? Would your jealousy burn like fire? Pour out your wrath on the nations who have not known you. He's praying for Yah's judgment, even though it has fallen on Jerusalem. Here, the psalmist is praying for Yah's judgment to fall on the nations, which is what Saul is telling them, that those who are persecuting you, God's wrath, fiery wrath on the day of his coming is going to settle this issue for good. And one reigns, verse 6 again, pour out your wrath on the nations who have not known you and on kings that have not called on your name. For they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his pasture, which is exactly what's happened for the last 2,000 years. Do not remember against us the crookedness of the fathers. Let your compassion speedily meet us, for we have been greatly weakened. That's the Netzarim. Yah's compassion was on them, and he gave the whole house of Judah 40 more years to get the story, to repent, to learn what was happening, to know a judgment's coming, to listen to the voice of Stephen. And what did they do? They killed him, rather than listen to him. And then all the things that were said to have happened did happen. Here's verse 9, same psalm. Help us, O Elohim, of our deliverance, for the sake of the glory of your name, and deliver us and cover over our sins for your name's sake. This is the cross. This is Messiah. This is the death and resurrection. That's how the house of Jacob gets covered. The Netzarim, the remnant, the faithful sons. Why should the nation say, where is their Elohim? As Jerusalem's being destroyed and all the stuff about the temple, and now it's burning and Jerusalem's fallen and people are dead and sick and starving and all the horrible. Don't you think the Romans were saying, yeah, where is this God of Israel? We conquered the God of Israel. We're above the God. Of course, that's what they were saying and have been saying for a long, long time. So where is Elohim? Here it is in blue. Here it is in blue. Let the vengeance of the outpoured blood of your servants be known among the nations before our eyes. This is what Saul is telling the people in Thessalonia. Yah's going to deal with it. I know you're going through hardship. I know you're going through trial, and it may even cost your life. But Yah will deal with this at his coming, when Messiah comes. Verse 11, let the groaning of the prisoner come before you. According to the greatness of your arm, preserve those appointed to death. Even if we die, preserve us. This is resurrection he's talking about. Verse 12, different color. So look what it says. And this is really interesting. So yes, those who have afflicted you, like Paul says, Yah is going to afflict. But here's why you can say it. Verse 12, and repay to our neighbors sevenfold their reproach into their bosom with which they have reproached you. That's Torah. Pay back 7 times. That's what he's talking about. But he's saying it, do it to the nations, to those who have persecuted us, from the temple priest to Caiaphas to Annas to Pilate to Herod to the Romans and everyone who's come after them. Repay to our neighbors over the last 2,000 years sevenfold their reproach into their bosom, which they have reproached you. Verse 13, O Yah, and we your people of the sheep of your pasture, we give thanks to you forever. From generation to generation, we show forth your praise. This is what Saul is speaking to the Thessalonians about. This is the verse he's pulling off of to let them know, despite the trial and tribulation that you're in, here, look at this. This is what's coming. This is what's happening. And now they know it even more because Yeshua's told them these things are about to occur, and they're living them. Okay. They're in the middle of all of this, right? And Saul's given them this hope. But way before even the psalmist came up with this information, the first one to tell us about all of this was none other than Moses. Of course, it's always Moses. It always goes back to the Torah, guys. Here is, and I'm not going to show every verse because I'm running out of time. And so I chopped some of this up, but I encourage you, please read Deuteronomy chapter 28 all the way to chapter 30. And when you read it, I want you to realize he is talking specifically. This is a prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. As Messiah said, that all things would be fulfilled on that generation. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 28. Excuse me, guys. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 15. Let's read a little bit. Now, this is Moses. He gives the blessings. He gives the cursings, right? This is the blessings for obedience, but then he gets into the cursings. And it shall be, if you do not obey the voice of Yah, your Elohim, to guard and to do all his commands, his commandments, and his laws, which I command you today, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Skipping down to verse 25. Again, I'm skipping some verses so you can go back and read the whole context. Yah causes you to be defeated before your enemies. You go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. And you shall become a horror to all the kings of the earth. And your carcasses, here it is, guys. Here it is from Matthew 24 to Psalm 29. And here's the first time it gets mentioned. And your carcasses shall be food for all the birds. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will be. For all the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the earth, with no one to frighten them away. Skipping on down to verse 36. Yah brings you and the king whom you set over you to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known. Rome, ultimately, is who he's talking about. And there you shall serve other mighty ones, wood and stone. Thus you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, same things that Psalm 79 said, and a mockery among all the peoples for like the last 2,000 years to which Yah drives you. Verse 38, you take much seed out into the field, but you'll gather little in. For the locust, the Roman army, will consume it. This comes, again, right out of Revelation, the locust army, right out of the book of Joel, the locust army. Verse 42 says, locusts possess all your trees and the fruit of your ground. Again, book of Joel, book of Revelation. We've gone over this before. You can go back and listen to some of the other things, but I want you to make the connections here. Now, some people say, well, you read Deuteronomy, he's talking about the captivity of Babylon. No, he's not. Babylon does not fit this story here. Yah told them they were going to Babylon for a certain amount of time to complete a particular transgression, and that they were coming back again within that generation, within that 70 years. This is not talking about a 70-year thing. This is talking about an ultimate destruction to which you will be scattered all around the nations. This is talking about what Messiah was talking about. Wherever the bodies or the carcasses are, there the eagles or the vultures will be. Verse 45 says, and all the curses shall come upon you, and they shall pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed. And that process took 1,500 years to occur. And its culmination is when Messiah comes telling us not one stone left upon another. Until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of Yah, your Elohim, to guard his commandments and his laws, which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and for a wonder, and on your seed forever, because you did not serve your Elohim with joy and gladness of heart for all the plenty. Skipping on down to verse 49. Yah shall bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies. Well, that's prophecy right there. What's the very symbol of Rome? The eagle. A nation whose language you shall not understand, Latin, a fierce looking nation, the mightiest army of its day, the America of its day. Verse 52. And they shall besiege you at all your gates. This is before there was even a city or a Jerusalem. He's telling them this is going to happen. They shall besiege you at all your gates. Yeshua says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, they shall besiege you at all your gates till your high and fenced walls, in which you are trusting, because they trusted. Nobody can breach Jerusalem. We got the temple, and that was all a lie. Just like saying the Russians aren't coming into Ukraine. Yes, they were. In which you are trusting, come down in all your land, and they shall besiege you at all your gates in your land, which Yah, your Elohim, has given you. This wasn't just going to happen to Jerusalem. This was going to happen to the Galilee. This was going to happen in Judah. This was going to happen in Jordan. This was going to happen in synagogues outside the land of Israel. Rome was going to sweep away the Jewish people as much as they could, and they tried, and almost succeeded in doing so. And they shall besiege you at all your gates, verse 53, and you shall eat the fruit of your own body. Now, this is something later on you're reading Josephus and the historical accounts. He says it's going to get so bad inside of this besieged city, you're going to turn to cannibals. And they did. And there's some other verses you guys can read, and they're kind of graphic and yucky, and I didn't want to get into it for tonight. But read this on your own. It says, and you shall eat the fruit of your own body, the flesh of your sons and your daughters, whom Yah your Elohim has given you, in the siege and distress in which your enemies distress you. And that is exactly what winds up happening in Jerusalem. Verse 61, it says, also, every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the book of this Torah, Yah does bring upon you until you are destroyed. So all the plagues that are in the book, and plagues that are not even written in the book yet. This is a direct quote, or directly related to Revelation 22, 18 and 19. That says, if you add to the words of the prophecy of the book of Revelation, or you take away, if you don't understand why Yah is doing what he's doing to Jerusalem, you ignore Jerusalem, all the plagues that are written in this book will come upon you. Well, guess what we have had come upon us for the last 2,000 years and are still having come upon us right now? This will be more of our message for next week. We are having all the plagues written in the book of Revelation has come upon every single generation that there has been, because we've tossed the story away. We made it about the nations. We made it about some other people that have nothing to do with Israel, some other organization, a Gentile organization, and we've just totally ignored one of the most prophesied events there are in the scripture outside of the coming of the Messiah, the destruction of Jerusalem because of their sin. It says, and Yah shall scatter you among the peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and you shall serve other mighty ones, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. And among those nations you are to find no rest, nor have a resting place for the sole of your foot. But there Yah shall give you as a trembling heart and failing eyes and sorrow of being. And that is exactly what has happened to Judah and Israel, the northern house and the southern house, for the last 2,000 years, and more than that, 2,500 years, and even longer than that for the northern house. But so all of that's about the destruction of Jerusalem. Incredible. Again, go read this stuff. But here's the thing I wanted to get to, because this is what's cool. Because by chapter 30, he then says, verse 1, all this is going to happen, right? All this is coming. All this horror, the nations are going to do this to you. Well, we just read in Psalm 79, but Yah's going to put sevenfold on them. Saul's telling us, Yah's going to pay back those who tribulate you, afflict those who afflict you. That's the promise. Here's Deuteronomy 30. This all comes right from Moses, guys. Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 through 4. And it shall be, when all these words come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have before you, and you shall bring them back to your heart among the nations. You begin to read Moses again. You begin to understand. You begin to say, oh my goodness, yes, this is us. This is the story. This is who we are. Whether we were native born or not, we are now all grafted into this. When you do that at some point in the future, for us now it's 2,000 years later, and shall bring them back to your heart among all the nations where Yah your Elohim drives you, and shall turn back to Yah your Elohim and obey his voice, according to all that I command you today. Have a heart to obey his instructions, his commandments, with all your heart and with all your being, you and your children. Then Yah your Elohim shall turn back your captivity, and shall have compassion on you, and he shall turn back and gather you from all the peoples where Yah your Elohim has scattered you. If any of you are driven out to the farthest points under the heavens, from there Yah your Elohim does gather you, and from there he does take you. And here it is, chapter 30, verse 6 and 7. 7's in blue because I want you to make this connection all the way back to where we were starting at Thessalonians. And Yah your Elohim shall circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed, to love Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, so that you might live. Live eternally, we now know, but so that you might live. Verse 7. And here it is. This is what Saul was talking about. This is the 7 times. This is Psalm 79. This is how he says, those who tribulate you will be tribulated. Those who afflict you will be afflicted. Those who persecute you will be persecuted. And Yah, your Elohim, shall put all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecuted you. Now, we're going to talk about kind of what's going on around our world and all the things that are happening, because we really need to understand how Yah's judgment actually occurs and what it actually looks like in a practical sense here on earth. But the promise is what's been done to the house of Judah, to the house of Israel, what's been done to his people, grafted in, all the person is going to come back upon the nations 7 times as bad as it was to Jerusalem, to the house of Israel. That's sobering. That is sobering. And I believe we are watching it. We've been watching it in every generation, but we're watching it now. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 6, and Elohim shall rightly repay the affliction, with affliction, those who afflict you, and give you who are afflicted rest, Shabbat, with us when the Master Yeshua is revealed from heaven with his mighty messengers. And we will talk more about that next week. I have absolutely run out of time. I know I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger again. I apologize, guys, but that's Yah's word for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that study. This thing's coming full circle, guys. This thing's coming full circle. And once you understand the story, once you understand the pattern of what has gone on, what is going on, what Yeshua said, what the apostle said, as you read Thessalonians, now that we have the outline, the story, it's going to make so much more sense to you. And I hope that you join me for the rest of these studies. We'll be back here again next week, next Wednesday night, 7:30. Please join us again. Don't forget to join us in the morning, early in the morning. We've got Morning Manna devotionals. If you have our LMC app, it's right in the resources section under Morning Manna. You can listen to a 5-minute devotion every day. You can send it out to people. We're also, I'm going to try to keep putting it on our Telegram app. We'll try to put that up there. If somebody can do that in the morning, copy it and paste it right in Telegram. So maybe people who don't have the app or haven't downloaded it yet, they can listen to it. Just a short devotion. And we got a real special hidden manna for you guys this week. We'll share that with you on Shabbat. So join us, please, 10 a.m. for Shabbat. As we talk about the things hidden in Yah's Word. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Don't forget, if you have not already, please subscribe. It helps us out. Give us a thumbs up. Send us out to somebody. Support us. We appreciate that. Support us with your prayers. Support us with your comments. Support us financially. We really need your help in doing what we do, to keep doing what we do. If you're blessed by this, we encourage you to do so. Guys, have a great evening tonight. God bless. And as always, Shalom.